I look back on that whole thing, which was, craziness, but, and I don't like to talk about it much, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah, why?
I don't like to talk about it much. In fact, I really try to avoid talking about it because for a long time I decided, first of all, nobody in show business should complain. It's just rule number one.
Conan O'Brien spoke for the first time about that night, the evening when Rob Reiner and his son Nick confronted one another in full view of everyone at Conan's Christmas party. "I saw Nick screaming directly into his father's face," Conan recalled, his voice steady yet heavy with the memory. What began as a moment of discomfort and tension gradually revealed a far deeper fracture, a quiet rupture that had been building for years. At first, no one could fully grasp what was happening. To the casual observer, it looked like a strained family argument, tense, perhaps awkward, but ultimately ordinary. Yet beneath the surface, the moment carried a weight that went largely unseen, a subtle collapse quietly unfolding before everyone's eyes. Conan explained that he had avoided speaking about the event for years, guided by an unspoken principle: in show business, complaints and vulnerability are rarely shared. On that night, nothing initially felt tragic. On the surface, it was merely a family disagreement pulled into view. Only later did the true gravity become apparent. The tension, the unease, the small, almost imperceptible signals, these were the markers of a struggle far larger than the argument itself. What appeared chaotic in hindsight was, in reality, a deeply human unraveling, one that no amount of holiday cheer could obscure. From the moment Nick entered the room, it was evident he did not belong. While guests moved easily among each other, laughing, greeting friends, and lingering in small clusters, he remained apart. He did not settle near the fire, nor did he join the conversations that flowed around him. He moved through the gathering as if physically present but somewhere else entirely in his mind. At first, his words were fragmented, incomplete thoughts that seemed to float without direction. Some guests whispered that perhaps he was anxious, or simply uncomfortable in a room full of strangers and familiar faces alike. But gradually, the nature of his presence became unmistakable, its weight settling over the space like a shadow. Then his tone shifted. It sharpened, became deliberate, and was directed entirely at his father. The room, once filled with warmth and easy laughter, stilled. Guests exchanged quiet, uneasy glances, recognizing that this was no ordinary confrontation. The music, the glittering lights, the festive glow, all receded, leaving only a tension that seemed to hang in the air, palpable and almost suffocating. In that moment, one of Hollywood's most admired families was laid bare, their struggles and fractures visible to those who had only expected charm and celebration. No one intervened. The room held its collective breath, witnessing something private, intimate, and irrevocable. Nick's presence carried an intensity that was difficult to define, as though he were observing and measuring every detail, the room, the guests, his father, with a precision that made hesitation impossible. Every word, every pause, seemed weighted, articulating truths that had long gone unspoken. Rob, meanwhile, stood attempting to manage the situation through the careful composure of a father, a man used to guiding and controlling. But here, that control faltered. His gestures, measured and deliberate, could not bridge the growing divide. The evening, intended as a refuge from public scrutiny, had become instead a silent testament to the cost of relationships, legacy, and the pressures that remain unspoken until they can no longer be contained. By the time the confrontation reached its peak, the party no longer existed as it had. Silence replaced laughter. The warmth that had filled the room dissipated, leaving behind a quiet, heavy tension that each guest carried in their own way. What had begun as a single, awkward moment had revealed something far deeper, a long-standing struggle, a collision of expectation, history, and vulnerability that no one could resolve in the moment. Those who witnessed it were left with an understanding that what they saw was not merely a family argument, but a glimpse into the delicate, often unseen realities of human connection, trust, and the burdens we carry in silence. For years, Conan O'Brien's Christmas party had been something rare in Hollywood, a private refuge, a quiet space removed from cameras, headlines, and the constant performance of public life. It was not simply another industry gathering. It was a sanctuary. No paparazzi, no recording devices hidden behind smiles, no whispered gossip traded for advantage. Conan carefully maintained that space with intention, offering those present a night to breathe, to exist without pretense, to be human. The room carried its own kind of intimacy, a sense that the usual hierarchies, the politics of fame, could be suspended, if only for a few hours. The air itself seemed to soften. Drinks were poured slowly. Conversations drifted and lingered without calculation. Laughter, when it came, felt real, unguarded. Even the most prominent figures, the ones used to masks, to performance, allowed themselves to be, if only briefly, unmasked. And then everything changed. On December 14, 2025, the day after that night, Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead in their home. The news struck like a shockwave, reverberating through the industry. Phones lit up, social media erupted, and all attention turned to one name, Nick Reiner. The memory of that evening, once warm and private, suddenly took on a new weight. Every smile, every glance, every word from that night was now reframed, dissected, and replayed in the minds of those who had been present. The intimate moments of a holiday gathering became, retrospectively, evidence, not in the legal sense, but in the way memory carries significance, and in the way human observation weighs each detail once tragedy has passed. When Conan finally spoke about the night, he did not take the tone of a late-night host. The humor, the quick wit, was gone, replaced by measured, cautious words that bore the weight of what he had witnessed. He described the evening as beginning to unravel the very moment the door opened and Rob Reiner entered with Michelle and Nick. Those present recalled the same subtle shift. The room did not gasp, there was no sudden silence, yet the warmth seemed to quietly drain away. Something had changed. The air had shifted imperceptibly, a tension that grew without announcement. The feeling was not dramatic, it was a slow and unsettling recognition that something heavy had begun. When Rob appeared, he offered the smile Hollywood had known for decades, but it did not linger. It was fleeting, more a gesture of habit than of genuine joy, a practiced mask over deeper concern. Conan observed that Rob never looked at ease. He did not move toward friends or conversations as usual. His eyes scanned the room constantly, taking in details, measuring the space and the people within it. He arrived not as a guest ready to celebrate, but as a man carrying a weight that could not be set down. Every gesture, every forced smile, seemed an attempt to contain something threatening, something internal that could not be shared. And then attention shifted to Nick. While guests gathered in clusters, he drifted alone, moving slowly, quietly, a presence both physical and absent at once. His eyes did not linger in ordinary contact. They studied, assessed, catalogued, as if everyone in the room were a subject in a private analysis only he could perform. Norman Liu, for example, remembered a brief interaction, Nick's humor faintly visible, yet shadowed by a quiet sullen quality. Others noted it was not a gaze of engagement but of scrutiny, a methodical scanning that left people uneasy, unsure if they were being seen or dissected. The moment that crystallized the tension arrived quietly. Nick stopped in front of a well-known comedian. There was no greeting, no smile. Only two calm questions. Who are you? Are you famous? The tone was neutral, flat, almost devoid of emotion, yet precisely this neutrality made the moment unsettling. There was no aggression, no sarcasm, only a quiet force that altered the room. Rob remained nearby, rigid, trying to maintain composure. A close friend observed a subtle giveaway. Rob's hand clenched a glass until his knuckles whitened. It was not irritation, it was fear, the kind of fear a parent feels when every tool, every word, every act of authority seems ineffective, when even love and presence cannot bridge the distance between them. As the night progressed, the tension only deepened. Nick did not lose control. There was no outburst, no chaos. Instead, his voice, slow and deliberate, carried each word with precision, each statement landing with an almost tangible weight. He addressed his father directly. You're always talking about family values, but everything is already arranged for the people you think deserve it. Rob froze, answering quickly, almost reflexively, as if rehearsed in the countless repetitions of similar confrontations. Nick, this isn't the time. We've already talked about this, he said. But Nick continued, the cadence calm, deliberate, unyielding, a quiet force, a deliberate unraveling of the distance between them, of the authority Rob had relied upon, and of the fragility of the ties that bound them. Nick continued, his words circling quietly yet relentlessly around money, authority, and control. He spoke of documents, decisions made without his knowledge, of arrangements executed behind his back. Guests later whispered that they had heard him reference a will, assets, authority, matters entrusted to others he did not trust. And then, with a calm precision that made the moment almost unbearable, he spoke a line that seemed to still the room entirely. You're preparing everything for a world without me. You always have. The words landed with a weight that no one could deflect. In that instant, every assumption, every casual interpretation of past grievances, was stripped bare. Few present could comprehend the depth of Nick's feelings, or the truth of what he believed, but it was clear that this was not a spontaneous outburst. These were emotions cultivated over years, simmering quietly until they demanded expression in the most public and painful way possible. Michelle moved instinctively, reaching toward Nick, her hand trembling as she tried to intervene, her voice low, careful. "Nick, not here, please." But when he turned toward her, his face was hard, cold, unyielding. She stepped back, small and almost defeated. That gesture, minor in its motion, spoke volumes. It marked the moment when control slipped from all hands. The energy in the room became heavy, taut, an almost tangible current of tension and fear. Rob, standing nearby, attempted to re-establish reason, to bridge the gap with calm, authority, even warmth. None of it worked. He simply stood, listening as the very tools he had relied upon as a father, words, gestures, presence, proved ineffective against the force in front of him. Conan admitted that he could not recall every word exchanged that night, but he remembered the feeling, the oppressive, silent pressure. "I didn't see a family argument," he said later. "I saw pressure. Pressure like one person cornering another, so that every possible response feels wrong. It was not about volume, or anger, or chaos. It was psychological, quiet, unrelenting, crushing. No one stepped in, not because they did not care, but because no one knew how." The line between parent and child, so carefully maintained over decades, had been quietly severed, and there was no way to repair it in that moment. The confrontation did not conclude with resolution. It ended with exhaustion. Nick turned away first, leaving Michelle silent, shaken, as if the room itself had exhaled. Rob remained frozen for a long, measured moment, his mind processing the reality before him. A close friend placed a hand on his shoulder, a small gesture of grounding. It was then that Rob whispered, barely audible, "I'm scared. I don't know what he'll do next." There was no anger in that fear, no irritation, only helplessness, a raw, piercing awareness of vulnerability. This was a father confronting the limits of his influence, witnessing the fragility of love and authority when they are tested beyond endurance. When the family finally departed, no one followed. No farewells, no hugs, only silence. The room retained its weight long after their footsteps faded. One guest described the experience as stepping out of light into darkness, unsure of what lay ahead. Conan, reflecting on that night, paused mid-sentence, silent for a long moment, his eyes heavy with memory. What struck him most was not the confrontation itself, but the fear he had heard before, quiet, contained, ever-present. After prior parties, when laughter faded and the guests had gone, Conan and Rob would sit in quiet conversation. No cameras, no audience, just two men and the weight of concern. Rob rarely spoke at length, but when the subject turned to Nick, his voice changed, slower, heavier, deliberate. He spoke of rehab, fleeting glimpses of hope, and setbacks. There was never anger, only cautious heartbreak, the fear that a single misstep could push his son further away. This was the fear Conan remembered, not the fear of celebrity, or image, or reputation, but the raw, unshielded fear of a parent realizing a child might slip beyond reach. Rob had once whispered, almost to himself, "Being a father in this situation is incredibly hard. You want to protect your child, but at some point, you realize the final decisions aren't in your hands." That whisper, uttered on a Christmas night heavy with warning signs, carried the echo of years of anticipation and concern, moments that had gone unnoticed or ignored. Later, pieces began to fill in. Nick had struggled with addiction for years, navigating multiple rehabilitation programs, some offering temporary relief, others fading into relapse. Those close to him understood that his challenges were not limited to substance use. They involved deeper, persistent struggles that had quietly shaped his behavior, his relationships, and the weight he carried into every room he entered. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Nick was contending with profound mental health challenges, coupled with intense emotional swings that few could fully comprehend. During this period, his psychiatric medication was reportedly altered, a sensitive transition that clinicians say can deeply influence mood, perception, and impulse control. Those closest to him observed a growing restlessness, a suspicion that extended beyond possessions or wealth. In his mind, trust itself seemed fragile, loyalty tentative, and even love could not be taken for granted. The sense of paranoia was pervasive, spreading quietly but relentlessly, coloring each interaction, each glance, each moment of daily life. Authorities had reportedly been called to the family home on several occasions over the years. Minor arguments would flare, then subside, only to resurface later with greater intensity. Each resolution seemed temporary, a surface calm that never addressed the deeper, underlying tension. When the events of December 14th unfolded, investigators began to reconstruct Nick's movements with a precision that felt almost clinical. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured him moving with a calm, deliberate composure, purchasing a drink, speaking politely to a cashier. Experts noted that it was this very calmness, rather than chaos, that unsettled them. It was control, measured and deliberate, not panic. In the days that followed, investigators traced a pattern in his actions: careful routes, quiet detours, small behaviors suggesting an acute awareness of observation. At one hotel, windows were covered with bed sheets, a minor detail, yet one that spoke volumes about the level of vigilance and intention behind each choice. Not every detail of the timeline has been fully verified, but the questions it raises are impossible to ignore. How much control had Nick truly lost, and how much had he been exerting all along? Currently, Nick is held in a tightly supervised psychiatric unit under constant observation. Court reports describe him as withdrawn, speaking only when necessary, his appearance dominated by a protective gown intended to prevent self-harm. Even the legal proceedings have been paused, with additional time granted for mental competency evaluations. To the public, these dates may appear as routine entries in a court calendar. To those who loved Rob and Michelle, they represent a wound that remains raw, one that refuses to close. What makes this story resonate so deeply is not only what occurred after that night. It is the accumulation of everything that preceded it: the subtle tension, the warning signs, the quiet moments dismissed or overlooked, the hope that things might somehow correct themselves without confrontation. When Conan finally spoke, he did not expose scandal or spectacle. He revealed the truth that everyone had sensed but no one had wanted to acknowledge. The signals had been there all along, painfully clear, and yet impossible to intervene upon. The investigation continues, leaving the world suspended between fragments of fact and the weight of heartbreak. But one detail remains unmistakable. On that Christmas night, inside a home built for warmth, laughter, and human connection, something already felt wrong. There was no visible chaos yet. There was no dramatic confrontation to fill headlines. But the air itself carried a quiet, unspoken fear, a tension that had been present long before anyone realized it, waiting for recognition that never came.